My husband stood in front of the lawyer and said, "Everything is in my name, the house, the cars, the business." He smirked at me. The lawyer opened the folder, went silent, then looked at my husband and said, "Sir, you need to see this." His face went white when he saw who actually owned it all. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment. From which part of the world you are watching, get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. He said it so casually, as if commenting on the weather. The dinner party was in full swing, the air thick with laughter and the smell of roasted chicken and greens. I was coming in from the kitchen with a fresh basket of cornbread when Richard's voice, loud and assured, cut through the other conversations. "Oh, you know how it is," he was saying to Malcolm and his wife, Sheila. He leaned back in his chair at the head of our table, gesturing with his glass of sweet tea. "Someone's got to steer the ship. I handle all the big decisions, investments, the house, the cars, the weight of it all." He shook his head with a false modesty that made my teeth ache. "Ellie's my heart. She keeps the home fires burning. Lets me focus on the important stuff." Malcolm chuckled, a familiar, complicit sound. Sheila offered me a small, tight smile as I placed the bread down. I did not return it. My face was arranged into what I had perfected over 33 years, a pleasant, neutral mask that suggested attentive agreement. "It's a team effort," I said, my voice even, carrying just enough to be polite. Richard reached out then. His hand, large and warm, closed over mine where it rested on the table. He gave it 2 patronizing pats. "That's right, baby. You're my best supporter." His eyes were on Malcolm, not on me. The gesture was not affection. It was a punctuation mark, a period at the end of his sentence. The sting was not sharp. It was the dull, deep ache of an old bruise being pressed. I slid my hand away under the pretext of smoothing my napkin. "More tea, anyone?" I spent the next hour in motion, clearing plates, refilling glasses, fetching the peach cobbler and vanilla ice cream. The movement was a shield. As long as I was busy, I was invisible. I was part of the scenery, like the well-kept furniture or the pictures on the walls. Richard held court, his stories growing grander, his pronouncements about the market and politics more absolute. Each boast was a tiny stone added to a pile I carried in my chest. Later, the door finally closed behind Malcolm and Sheila. The silence they left behind was immediate and heavy. Richard loosened his belt with a satisfied groan and walked into the living room, leaving a trail of crumbs and empty glasses on the polished table. I began my usual nighttime ritual. The clink of china and the rush of water in the sink were the only sounds. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, watching me work. "Dinner was good, Ellie. Sheila said her greens weren't as seasoned as yours." "Thank you," I said, not turning around. "Malcolm thinks we should look at that new development off the interstate. Rental properties. Might be a smart move." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and faced him. This was the moment. The request had been weighing on me for days. "Before we talk about new investments, I wanted to discuss something else. Lisa called today." He blinked. "Your sister's girl?" "Yes, Lisa. She's been accepted into that nursing program at State, the one she worked 2 jobs to qualify for. She's short on the first semester's fees, just $2,000. I thought we could give it to her from the savings account. It would change her life." His expression shifted from vague recognition to clear dismissal. He waved a hand. "Ellie, we can't just hand out money. She needs to learn responsibility, get a loan like everyone else." "She has loans. This is for the Gap. It's a small amount for us, Richard. We have over $60,000 in that account." He stiffened. "You don't need to be quoting balances. That's my concern." He took a step into the kitchen, his presence filling the small space. "That money is for my plans, for our security. I decide where it goes. It's our savings," I said, my voice lower than I intended. "From my teacher's salary, too, for all those years." A flash of irritation crossed his face. "Your salary was for the household, the extras. The money that built that account came from my work, my decisions." He said it with such absolute conviction, as if the last 3 decades of my life had been a pleasant hobby. You don't understand the pressure, Ellie. You don't understand how these things work. I understand that my niece needs help, and we can provide it. He laughed then, a short, humorless sound. See, that's your problem. Sentiment. You let your heart make decisions. That's not how you build something. That account, this house, everything in my name, it's a responsibility. My responsibility. He moved closer, not to threaten, but to instruct, to lay down the law. You need to remember your role. You keep this house running. You support me. I handle the finances. I make the big choices. He looked at me, his gaze firm, convinced of his own wisdom. My name's on the accounts, Ellie. I'm the man. I make the rules here. You just worry about the house. The words landed not with a roar, but with a terrible, silent finality. They were so clean, so precise. They carved out the boundaries of my world with razor clarity. I make the rules. You just worry about the house. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had shared a bed, a home and a life with for 33 years. I saw the absolute certainty in his eyes. He believed it. He believed this was the natural order, a truth as fundamental as gravity. In that moment, any last faint hope that he might see me, really see the partner, the contributor, the equal, dissolved like sugar in hot tea. It was simply gone. I did not argue. I did not cry. I felt a strange, cold stillness settle over me. "All right, Richard," I said, my tone flat, devoid of any emotion he would recognize as resistance. "If that's how it is." He nodded, satisfied. Crisis averted, order maintained. He gave my shoulder a squeeze, a gesture he meant as reassuring. "That's my girl. Don't you worry your pretty head about it. I've got everything under control." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading for the television in the den. I stood at the sink, my hands resting on the cool porcelain. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I looked out the dark window above the sink and saw only my own reflection, a middle-aged woman in an apron, standing in a kitchen she was told to just worry about. That was the night the last thread of something inside me snapped. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, definitive click of a lock turning. He had declared the rules of his kingdom, and in the deep, silent chambers of my mind, where he never thought to look, I began, for the first time, to seriously consider how one goes about dismantling a kingdom from the inside. I stood at the sink until the sound of the television, a low murmur of sports commentary, filtered down the hall. The familiar noise was a signal. The performance was over. He was settled. The house was once again divided into his territory and mine. I removed my apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. The quiet in the kitchen was now a space to think, not to mourn. I did not go to bed. Sleep was impossible. Instead, I moved through the downstairs rooms, turning off lights, checking locks. It was my routine, but tonight each action felt deliberate, like measuring steps. My mind was not on the tasks. It was circling a single, solid point. The rules had been declared. My options, as he saw them, were to comply or to leave with nothing. I found both options unacceptable. The air in the house felt close, stifling. I needed space that was not part of his domain. I found myself at the foot of the pull-down stairs that led to the attic. Richard never went up there. He called it my junk space. I turned the cold metal handle and unfolded the stairs. The air that drifted down was several degrees cooler and carried the scent of old wood and insulation. I climbed up into the darkness and pulled the cord for the single bare bulb. The attic was a landscape of labeled boxes and draped furniture. In the far corner, under the slope of the roof, sat my mother's trunk. It was a simple metal-banded cube she had brought from her own mother's house. I had not opened it in years. The sight of it now was not a conscious decision. It was a gravitational pull. I pushed aside a box of old Christmas decorations and knelt before it. The latch was stiff with disuse. When it opened, the smell of cedar and old paper rose to meet me. On top lay a folded quilt, its colors faded. Beneath that were photograph albums, my baby clothes pressed and yellowed, and at the very bottom, beneath a layer of tissue paper, were 3 ledger books. They were not fancy. They were the kind sold at the 5 and dime, with green fabric covers and columns printed in faint blue lines. I lifted them out. They were heavier than they looked. I sat back on my heels, the cold of the attic floor seeping through my slacks, and opened the first one. The handwriting was my mother's, a careful, sloping script in black ink. The first page was dated January 1963. The entries were meticulous. At the top of each page was my father's weekly pay from the plant. Then, line by line, my mother had itemized every expense: mortgage, utilities, groceries, church tithe. And then, in a separate column, she had listed other deductions. Poker loss, $20. Racetrack, $15. New suit, for him, $45. Bar tab, $12. Next to each of these, in the margin, she'd written a single word: gone, gone, gone. I turned the pages. The years passed in those neat columns. My school shoes were listed beside another poker loss. The payment for my first typing class was next to an entry for money lent to a brother who never repaid. My mother's entries were a clinical record of subtraction, of what came in and what was taken away. The gone column was always substantial. The second ledger showed the same pattern. But here, near the back, I saw a new notation: a small separate tally in the upper corner of several pages: seed fund. The amounts were tiny. $2 saved from the grocery budget 1 week, $5 from selling eggs to a neighbor, $1.50 in rebate stamps cashed in. She was skimming, not from my father, but from the margins of her own management, hiding life rafts in the ledger itself. The third book was only half full. The entries stopped in the spring of 1987, the year my father died. On the last page, she had written a final sum. It was not a large number. It was the total of her seed fund. Below it, she had written, "For Eleanor, for choices." I closed the book. My hands were steady, but my breath came short and sharp in the cold air. I was not looking at a history of victimhood. I was looking at a manual of silent resistance. My mother had not been a passive sufferer. She had been a cartographer, mapping the leaks in the family finances with grim precision. She had documented the draining of her labor, her hopes, her security. And in the small spaces between the lines, she had built a fortress of her own. A few $100s hidden away to give her daughter choices. The anger I felt then was not hot. Not. It was a crystalline, clarifying cold. It was not just for Richard. It was for my father, whose carelessness filled those pages. It was for every man who believed his name on a paper, granted him ownership of a woman's entire world. And it was for myself. For the years I had spent politely folding my own dreams into smaller and smaller squares to fit the space he allowed. My mother's ledgers were proof that the feeling I had of being a silent partner in my own dissolution was not an illusion. It was a financial reality. She had tracked it, and she had planned around it in the only way she could. I sat in the attic dust, the past solid in my hands. The rules Richard had declared were not new. They were a tired, old script. My mother had lived it. I had been living it. But she had also shown me something else. She had shown me that while the man may make the pronouncements, the woman who manages the details, who knows where every penny goes, holds a different kind of power, a quieter power, a patient power. I placed the ledgers back in the trunk, but I did not bury them under the quilt. I left them on top. I closed the lid and latched it. As I descended the attic stairs and pushed them back into the ceiling, I was not the same woman who had climbed up an hour before. The plan was not fully formed, but its foundation was. I would not leave with nothing, and I would not just worry about the house. I would secure the house. I would secure everything. Not through argument, which was a game he always won, but through the method my mother had understood: documentation, patience, and the quiet, strategic movement of assets from one column to another, from his to mine. I went to bed just before dawn. Richard slept soundly beside me, his breathing deep and untroubled. He believed the matter was settled. I lay on my side, staring at the first gray light seeping around the curtains. I thought of ledgers, of signatures, of the absolute authority of paper. A calm, focused determination had replaced the hollow ache. He had declared the rules of his game. I had just decided to learn how to win it. The clarity of that morning was absolute. Richard left for work with his usual briefcase and a peck on my cheek, a gesture as routine as brushing his teeth. I stood at the window and watched his car turn the corner. The house was silent, but the silence was now a workspace. I had a plan, but I needed a second opinion. I needed Beverly. Beverly Thompson had been my closest friend since we taught together at Roosevelt High. She retired 2 years before I did, not to relax, but to care for her ailing mother. She was a woman who understood duty, but also resistance. More importantly, she had worked as a paralegal for a downtown firm for 20 years. She knew how systems worked, and more crucially, how they could be navigated. I did not call. A phone call could be overheard, its tone misinterpreted. I drove to her house, a cozy bungalow on the other side of the neighborhood. Her front porch was shaded by a large magnolia tree. She opened the door before I could knock, taking in my face. "Ellie," she said, her voice a low register of immediate concern. "Get in here." She led me to her sunlit kitchen at the back of the house. The room was always warm, filled with plants and the smell of whatever she had last baked. She put the kettle on without asking and gestured for me to sit at the small, round table. "Talk," she said, sitting across from me. Her eyes, sharp behind her glasses, missed nothing. "Richard laid down the law last night," I began. My voice was steady. I recounted the dinner party, the pat on my hand, and the conversation in the kitchen. I repeated his words verbatim. "I'm the man. I make the rules here. You just worry about the house." Saying them aloud to Beverly stripped them of any power they had to shock. They became simply data. Beverly's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, the kettle whistled. She rose, poured the water into a waiting teapot, and brought it to the table with 2 porcelain cups. The ritual gave her a moment to think. "So," she said finally, settling back into her chair, "the question is, what are you going to do about it? And don't tell me you're going to just take it. I see that look in your eye. That's not your suffering in silence look. That's your calculating angles look." I took a breath. "I'm not leaving." She nodded once. "Good. Leaving is messy. They have all the lawyers." "I'm also not staying under his rules." A slow smile touched her lips. It was not a happy smile. It was a smile of recognition. "All right, now we're getting somewhere. What's the play?" "I want to secure everything. The house, the savings, the investments. I want it all in my name. Legally, irrevocably." Beverly let out a low whistle. "Ellie Reynolds, you are talking about financial warfare. He thinks he's the general, but you plan to take his whole army while he's sleeping." "I plan to show him that the army was never his to command. It was just his to use." I told her about the ledgers in my mother's trunk. I described the columns, the gone notations, the tiny seed fund. She documented it all. She showed me that the person who manages the money, who tracks every entry, is the person who truly understands where the power lies. Richard is loud. He likes the title of commander, but he's careless with the details. He leaves paperwork for me to file. He forgets meetings. He says, "You handle it, Ellie," when things are boring. Beverly's eyes lit with professional interest. Carelessness is a legal vulnerability. If he's habitually delegating financial management to you, that establishes a pattern. If he's signing things you put in front of him without reading them, that's on him. She sipped her tea. "But this isn't a courtroom drama. This is groundwork. You need to move assets, quietly. You need a professional who can make that happen, someone discreet and very, very good. I don't know anyone like that, I admitted. I do, Beverly said. She set her cup down with a definitive click. Lawrence Croft. He was a financial advisor at my old firm. Retired now, but he still consults for a few special clients. He's ethical, but he understands nuance. He believes in protecting assets, especially for people who've been systematically disadvantaged. He's helped more than a few women in situations that are familiar. A feeling, something like hope, but colder and more solid, began to form in my chest. Will he see me? He'll see us, Beverly corrected. I'll call him. We'll frame it as estate planning for a concerned friend, which, she added, is not a lie. You are planning your estate. You're just planning to make sure your husband isn't in it. For the first time since the previous night, I felt my shoulders relax, not in defeat, but in focus. The path was still shrouded, but I now had a guide. What do I need to bring? Everything, Beverly said. Every financial statement you can access. Deeds, account numbers, tax returns for the last 5 years. Anything with a signature or a balance. We need to see the whole battlefield. He keeps some files in his home office. Can you get copies without him knowing? I thought about it. Richard was orderly in a broad sense, but he was not meticulous. His office was a place of symbolic importance to him, but he rarely spent time in there except to pay bills once a month. Yes, I said, I can. Beverly reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her grip was firm. Listen to me, Ellie. This is the quiet part. This is the part where you move without a sound. You cannot get angry. You cannot get even. You must get strategic. Every emotion you feel, you convert it into a step in the plan. You understand? I looked at our hands, hers dark and steady over mine. I understand. This isn't about emotion anymore. It's about logistics. Good. She released my hand. I'll call Lawrence today. We'll meet at his office, not here. Somewhere neutral. You start gathering those papers. Use that just worrying about the house cover. He's given you the perfect camouflage. I finished my tea. The liquid was warm, the cup solid in my hand. The weight of the secret I was about to carry was immense, but it felt lighter, shared with Beverly. I was no longer alone with my mother's ghost and my own resentment. I had an ally with a map and a direct line to an expert. As I drove home, the suburban streets looked the same, but my vision had changed. I was no longer seeing just houses and lawns. I was seeing structures, titles, deeds. I was seeing the invisible web of ownership that held my world together, a web I had helped weave but had never thought to claim. That was about to change. The pain had been processed. The planning had begun. The meeting with Lawrence Croft took place in a small, unmarked office in a professional building near the city center. Beverly came with me. Lawrence was a man in his late 60s with a closely trimmed gray beard and eyes that held a perpetual look of mild assessment. He did not smile unnecessarily. He shook my hand, nodded to Beverly, and gestured to the chairs in front of his orderly desk. Beverly has given me a brief overview, he began, his voice low and even. You wish to explore asset protection strategies within a marital context. I wish to transfer all major marital assets solely into my name, I clarified, without my husband's knowledge or consent until the process is complete and irreversible. He steepled his fingers. That is a significant undertaking. The legality hinges on 2 factors: your existing legal authority to act on his behalf, which you say is established through habit, and his negligence in reviewing documents. We must also consider the source of funds for certain assets. Beverly mentioned you had documentation. I opened the large tote bag at my feet and placed 3 thick folders on his desk. 5 years of joint tax returns, deed to our house, statements for our 3 investment accounts, 2 savings accounts, and the brokerage. Titles for both cars, copies of his signed authorizations for me to handle routine banking. Lawrence opened the first folder. He spent several minutes in silence, turning pages. He compared signatures on different documents. He examined the deed, then the mortgage papers. Finally, he looked up. The house mortgage is paid. The deed is currently in both names with right of survivorship. Investment account A was opened with an inheritance you received upon your mother's passing. Is that correct? Yes, $25,000. It was deposited into our joint account, then used to open that investment. Richard always referred to it as our nest egg starter. But the initial capital was traceably yours, Lawrence noted, making a mark on a legal pad. That is relevant. The pattern here is clear. You are the designated household financial manager in practice, if not in title. He signs where you indicate. This creates a precedent of implied consent. He leaned back. My role is to advise you on the mechanisms, not the morality. The mechanisms are straightforward but require precision. You will need new documents drafted, quitclaim deeds for the property, transfer on death forms for the accounts, change of title for the vehicles. You will present them to him for signature at opportune moments, within the normal flow of your management duties. His inattention is your tool. And if he notices? Beverly asked. If he questions it, you have a prepared, truthful reason that aligns with his worldview, Lawrence said, his gaze on me. You can say the bank recommended it for estate planning efficiency, or that a lawyer friend suggested it simplifies matters. Use his own assumption that these details are beneath him. The key is to never present it as a demand or a discussion. It is paperwork, boring, administrative paperwork. The strategy was coldly logical. It transformed Richard's greatest insult, that I should just worry about the house, into my greatest weapon. My domain of mundane details was the perfect cover for a silent revolution. The work began the following week. I started with the smaller of the two cars, a sedan that was primarily mine. I told Richard the registration needed updating and the DMV had new forms. Just sign at the yellow stickers, I said, laying the single-page title transfer form on his desk one evening as he watched the news. He glanced at it, grunted, and scrawled his signature without reading a word. Thanks, hon, he said, his eyes never leaving the television. The document, which transferred his interest in the vehicle solely to me, went into my purse. I mailed it the next morning. A minor tremor, but the ground had moved. The larger assets required more careful staging. I waited for a Saturday morning when he was preoccupied with planning a golf outing. I placed the quitclaim deed for the house amid a stack of other papers, a property tax form, a homeowner's insurance renewal. The county sent these, I said. They're updating their records, needs both signatures. He was on the phone, laughing with a friend about tea times. Just tell me where, he said, waving a hand. I pointed to the signature lines. He signed both on the deed, then the tax form. He didn't even flip the page. The insurance form he pushed back. You look that over. You're better with the fine print. That single sheet of paper, with its dry legal language, severed his ownership of the house we had lived in for 22 years. My hand did not shake as I filed it away in the new locked firebox I had purchased, hidden on the top shelf of my bedroom closet. The investment accounts were the most complex. Lawrence prepared letters of instruction to the financial institutions, forms that required Richard's signature to change the primary owner and beneficiary. I presented them as compliance updates from the fund companies. More bureaucracy, I sighed, placing them in front of him with his morning coffee. They need signatures every few years now. Ridiculous, he muttered, but he signed. One account, then the other, then the third. Each signature was a thread pulled from the fabric of his assumed control. The process took months. There were moments of breath-holding panic. Once he picked up a transfer form and squinted at it. This looks different. My heart hammered against my ribs. It's the new federal layout, I said, my voice casual. All the statements have it now. More disclaimers. Makes my eyes cross, he said, and signed. With each successful transfer, a quiet, fierce triumph solidified within me. This was not the fleeting satisfaction of a sharp retort. This was the deep, steady certainty of concrete action. I watched him move through our days, his voice still loud, his opinions still declared as law. But I saw him now through a new lens. He was a man living in a house he no longer owned, driving cars that were no longer his, securing a future that had silently slipped from his grasp. His authority was a performance in a theater whose deed was now in my name. I became an actress of unparalleled skill. I listened to his plans for our money with attentive silence. I nodded at his pronouncements. I continued to worry about the house, its cleaning, its maintenance, its slowly shifting ownership. The ledger of my life, once a record of silent subtraction, was now a log of quiet, deliberate acquisitions. Every signature at sunrise, every document mailed was an entry in my new column. Not gone, but secure. The architecture of my new reality was complete, but it existed behind a facade I maintained with meticulous care. Richard moved through his days with undiminished confidence. He began talking about a new venture over dinner one evening. It was a freight brokerage company, a concept he'd gotten from a friend at the country club. "It's called Great Plains Logistics," he announced, stabbing a piece of steak. "Low overhead, high margins. Malcolm's cousin made a fortune in 2 years. All it takes is the right connections and some startup capital to secure contracts." I chewed slowly. Startup capital? How much? A line of credit. Maybe $75,000 to start. Use the house as collateral. Maybe the investment accounts as a guarantee. It's a formality. The cash flow will be immediate. He spoke with the easy certainty of a man who had never been truly told no by an institution. A cold alertness spread through me. This was an unforeseen variable. A new loan application would trigger fresh scrutiny. The bank would pull credit, verify assets, see the recent title changes. My carefully rearranged landscape would be exposed to a light I could not control. "That seems like a big risk," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What if the contracts don't come through?" He waved his fork dismissively. "You don't understand business, Ellie. It's about leverage. You use assets to create opportunity. The house isn't going anywhere. The investments are just sitting there. This is how wealth is built." He did not ask for my opinion. He was informing me of a decision already made in his mind. I said nothing more. Arguing would only make him more determined. Instead, I watched. He spent the next week in his home office on the phone, his voice booming with false bonhomie. He printed out business plans on expensive paper. He requested statements from our accounts, which I provided without comment. I saw the gleam in his eye, the thrill of a new project. It was the same gleam he'd had for a dozen other schemes that had fizzled after consuming time and money. But this one required a formal commitment from the world outside our walls. The day of his bank appointment arrived. He put on his best suit, the navy blue one. "Wish me luck," he said, adjusting his tie in the hall mirror. "Good luck," I replied, sounding exactly like a supportive wife. He left, and the house settled into its daytime silence. I did not pace. I washed the breakfast dishes, I folded laundry, I waited. The plan, Lawrence Croft had assured me, was legally sound. The assets were mine. But a bank officer asking direct questions was a wild card. He returned 2 hours later. Worse. I heard his car door slam with more force than usual. The front door opened and closed hard. I was in the living room dusting shelves that did not need it. His face was a storm cloud. He threw his briefcase onto the sofa, where it slumped against the cushions. "Unbelievable," he spat, not looking at me. "Just unbelievable." I stopped dusting. "What happened?" "The bank. Carlton, the loan officer. He's been handling my stuff for years." Richard ran a hand over his face. "He said the application raised flags, red flags. He said the collateral, the assets." He turned to me, his confusion morphing into anger. "He said the title search showed the house isn't in my name, that the primary investment accounts show a recent change of ownership. He asked if I was aware of asset dissipation activities." "Me!" I allowed a look of concerned confusion to form on my face. "That can't be right. There must be a mistake in their system. A mistake? He had printouts, Ellie, documents. He said he couldn't approve a dime until it was cleared up. He implied— Richard's voice dropped, thick with humiliation. He implied I might not have the authority I claimed. He talked about needing spousal signatures. My own wife. The irony was so profound I had to look away for a moment to compose my features. That's just bureaucratic nonsense, I said, my tone soothing. You know how these systems are. They get outdated information all the time. Remember when they said the car was still financed after we paid it off? My reasonable, house-worrying explanation seemed to calm him slightly. He sank into his armchair. It has to be a computer error, some glitch. Carlton said he'd look into it. But he was cold, Ellie. Professional. Like I was some kind of risk. The insult to his identity as a solid, credit-worthy man was clearly more painful than the denial of the loan itself. I'm sure it will get straightened out, I said. Do you want some coffee? He grunted in affirmation. I went to the kitchen. As I measured the grounds, I let the feeling I had been suppressing rise to the surface. It was not joy. It was validation. The first external, objective proof that my silent work had real-world consequences. The fortress walls had held. His assumed authority had crashed against them, and he didn't even know what he'd hit. He blamed a computer, a paperwork glitch, a bank officer's bad day. The truth, that his wife had quietly, legally stripped him of the leverage he took for granted, was so far outside his understanding that it was not even a possibility. I brought him his coffee. He took it without thanks, staring blankly at the wall. I'll call Carlton tomorrow, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Get this sorted. Can't have this hanging over the venture. Of course, I said. I'm sure it's just a mix-up. I returned to my dusting. The quiet in the house was different now. It was charged with a new tension. His confidence had been punctured. For the first time in our marriage, a system he believed served him had pushed back. He was in the dark, fumbling for a switch. I was in the light, watching him, knowing the switch was no longer connected to anything. The loan that failed was not a setback. It was the first visible crack in the foundation of his world. And he had no idea I was the one who had quietly, carefully, poured the water that froze and expanded to create it. The loan denial festered in him like a low-grade infection. For a week, he moved through the house with a simmering quiet, punctuated by sudden outbursts of frustration directed at the news, at misplaced keys, at the world in general. He made calls behind the closed door of his office, his voice initially confident, then increasingly strained. He tried another bank, a smaller commercial lender recommended by his friend Malcolm. I overheard snippets. Yes, substantial assets, joint for decades. Recent refinancing? No, that shouldn't— I see. The call ended with a sharp click. He did not emerge for an hour. The second rejection made him dangerous. The confusion was hardening into a paranoid suspicion. He began to scrutinize mail that had always been my domain. He dug out old financial files from his cabinet, spreading them on his desk, squinting at statements. I continued my routines, but my awareness was tuned to his every movement. The waiting was a new kind of tension. The trap was set. I needed him to walk into it himself. The trigger came on a Tuesday evening. He had received a statement in the mail for the main investment account. It was the first one mailed since the ownership transfer. I had intercepted the previous notices, but this one arrived while I was at the grocery store. He opened it. I returned to find him standing in the middle of the living room, a single sheet of paper trembling slightly in his hand. His face was pale beneath his usual complexion, his eyes wide with a kind of bewildered fury. "What is this?" His voice was low, dangerously calm. I set the grocery bags on the floor. "What is what, Richard?" He thrust the paper toward me. It was the statement. At the top, where both our names had been listed for 20 years, it now read, Eleanor M. Reynolds, sole owner. "It says sole owner," he said, each word precise. This is a mistake, a catastrophic error from the fund company. I've been calling them all afternoon. They put me on hold. They transferred me. They said they would look into it." He was repeating the phrase from the bank, the phrase that had become a symbol of his impotence. "This is the same glitch. It's spreading. Someone has corrupted our records." I looked at the statement, then back at him. I did not reach for it. "That is strange." "Strange?" He laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Ellie, this isn't strange. This is sabotage. Someone is tampering with our financial identity. First the house title at the bank, now this." He began to pace, the paper clenched in his fist. "It has to be that idiot at the first bank. He put some kind of flag on our profile, or identity theft. Yes, that has to be it." He was constructing a narrative, any narrative that did not involve looking across the room at his wife of 33 years. His capacity to avoid the obvious truth was almost impressive. "We need to get ahead of this," he declared, stopping his pacing. His expression shifted from panic to a resolve I knew well. It was the look of a man deciding to deploy his ultimate weapon, official authority. "We need a lawyer, a professional to cut through this bureaucratic nightmare, to protect what's mine, what's ours, before this error does real damage." This was the moment. I felt a profound stillness settle within me. "A lawyer?" "Thorne," he said, nodding as if confirming it to himself. "Eris Thorne. He handled my father's estate. He's expensive, but he's thorough. He'll send letters, make calls, get to the bottom of this. He'll secure everything in my name properly, so there can be no more mistakes." He looked at me, expecting resistance, worry about the cost. I met his gaze. My heart was a steady, quiet drum in my chest. "All right." My simple agreement seemed to throw him. He had prepared for an argument. "It could get contentious," he warned, puffing up slightly. "If this is institutional negligence, we may have to sue. Thorne will need full disclosure, access to everything." "I understand," I said. "When shall we see him?" "I'll call his office first thing tomorrow, get the earliest appointment." He looked back at the statement, his jaw tight. "Don't you worry, I'll fix this. I'll get control of this situation back." "I'm not worried," I said, and it was the truth. I bent to pick up the grocery bags. "I'll start dinner. Shall Coldy?" As I walked to the kitchen, I could feel his eyes on my back, but I knew he wasn't really seeing me. He was seeing a problem to be solved by another man in a suit, a man who would affirm his place in the world. The irony was so complete it was almost beautiful. He was marching us both to the lawyer who would formalize his defeat, believing it to be his salvation. That night, after he fell into a fitful sleep, I went to my closet. I opened the firebox and removed the folder Lawrence Croft had helped me prepare. It contained copies of every document: the quitclaim deed, the account transfers, the title changes, a clean chronological record of my silent campaign. I placed it in my leather portfolio, the one I used for church meetings. It looked innocuous. It looked like me. I closed the box. The path was now straight and short. He had chosen the destination himself, Eris Thorne's office. My only task was to arrive with the correct documents. The ultimatum had been issued, but not by me, by him. And in his arrogance, he had given me the final piece I needed, a credible witness to the unveiling. A lawyer's office would provide the neutral, professional setting where the truth would be undeniable, where his bluster would meet the immovable wall of legal fact. The confrontation was no longer something I feared. It was an appointment on my calendar, one I was prepared to keep. Richard secured an appointment with Eris Thorne for the following Thursday at 10 in the morning. The intervening days passed with a strange, suspended quality. Richard spent hours in his office, compiling what he called his evidence file, old statements, the deed copy he had, his birth certificate. He was building a case to prove his own existence to the world. I continued my household routines, but my mind was elsewhere, preparing for a different kind of performance. On Monday, I called Beverly. "The meeting is Thursday, Thorne's office." She was silent for a beat. "Are you ready?" "I have the documents. I need something else. I need to look ready. Meet me at the department store tomorrow, she said without hesitation. Main Street, 11. The next morning, I told Richard I was meeting a former teacher colleague for lunch. He nodded absently, barely looking up from his computer. I drove downtown. Beverly was waiting for me outside the store, her expression one of focused purpose. "We're not looking for pretty," she said as we entered the women's section. "We're looking for authoritative. We're looking for I am not asking." We bypassed the racks of floral prints and soft knits. Beverly led me to the career section. The suits here were structured in solid colors. She pulled out a blazer in a deep navy wool. "Try this," with a cream shell underneath. Not white, cream. Softer, but not weak. I took the items into the dressing room. I had not worn a suit since I retired from teaching. The fabric felt substantial, unfamiliar against my skin. I put on the trousers, the blazer, the simple silk shell. I looked at myself in the three-way mirror. The woman who looked back was not the Ellie Reynolds who refilled sweet tea and worried about the house. Her posture was straighter. The cut of the jacket squared her shoulders. The color was serious, professional. It did not ask for permission. I turned slightly, examining the lines. It fit as if it had been waiting for me. Beverly knocked and entered. She looked me up and down, her head tilted. "Yes," she said, a definitive statement. "That's the one. The shoes need to be closed-toe, low heel, practical. You're not trying to be fashionable. You're trying to be factual." We bought the suit. I charged it to the credit card, one that was still in both our names but that he never checked. It felt like a legitimate business expense. Beverly then drove us to her house. "Now we practice," she said. In her living room, she took the armchair. I sat on the sofa, my hands folded in my lap, wearing my old clothes again but feeling the memory of the suit's weight. "Thorne will likely let Richard speak first," Beverly said, adopting a neutral, professional tone. "Richard will explain his problem. He will be loud, confused, demanding. Your job is to say nothing until you are directly addressed. When you are, you will be concise. You will not explain, you will not justify. You will state facts. Let the documents do the talking. Your demeanor is your weapon. Calm is a weapon." She leaned forward. "What will you say if Thorne asks you what happened?" I met her gaze. "I will say, the documents reflect the legal ownership of the assets." "Good. What if Richard gets angry, demands to know why you did it?" "I will say, I secured the assets according to our long-established management pattern. Even better, it's true and it's unassailable." Beverly nodded. "Do not raise your voice. Do not get drawn into an argument about fairness or feelings. This is not about feelings. It is about property law. You are the client who walked in with her paperwork in order. He is the client who did not. Remember that." We practiced for an hour. She fired questions at me. Banyan Richard's bluster and Thorne's careful probing. My answers grew shorter, cleaner, more detached. I learned to pause for 3 seconds before responding, to let the emotional air clear. I learned to keep my eyes level and my hands still. When we finished, I felt drained but clear-headed. The anxiety had been transformed into procedure. Beverly made tea. We sat at her kitchen table, the late afternoon sun streaming in. "You know he's going to say you stole from him," she said quietly. "I didn't steal, I reclaimed. There's a difference. The initial capital for the biggest account was my mother's. My salary funded the household for 15 years, which allowed his income to be invested. I am the one who managed, saved, and reinvested every penny that grew in those accounts. He signed the transfers. His signature is on every page. I stole nothing. I corrected a ledger." Beverly smiled. "You sound like a lawyer. That's good." On Wednesday, I took the suit to the dry cleaner around the corner for a quick press. I laid out my undergarments, my shoes, a simple leather handbag. I checked the folder in my portfolio one last time. Every document was in chronological order with a summary cover sheet prepared by Lawrence Croft's assistant. It was not a confession, it was an audit report. That night, Richard was too agitated to sit still. "Thorne will get this sorted," he repeated, as much to convince himself as me. "He'll know what to do." "I'm sure he will," I said. I went to bed early. I did not expect to sleep, but I did. I woke before dawn, feeling rested and focused. I showered, dressed in my robe, and made coffee. I watched the sky lighten. This was the last morning I would live in the old dynamic. By noon, the rules would be rewritten. I put on the new suit. The wool was smooth against my skin. The cream silk felt cool. I looked in the full-length mirror on our bedroom door. The reflection showed a woman going to a business meeting, a competent woman, a woman with a file full of answers. There was no trace of the woman who accepted a pat on the hand. That woman was gone. Richard came out of his bathroom, tying his tie. He saw me and stopped. His eyes took in the suit, my hair, my posture. A flicker of confusion passed over his face, quickly replaced by a kind of approval. "You look nice," he said. "Professional. Good. We want to make the right impression." "Yes," I said, smoothing the lapel of the jacket. "We do." The drive to Eris Thorne's office was quiet. Richard rehearsed points under his breath, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. I looked out the window, my portfolio resting flat on my knees. The building was a modern glass structure in the city's financial district. The lobby was cool marble and muted light. We took the elevator to the 12th floor. Thorne's reception area was quiet, furnished in dark wood and deep leather chairs. A woman with a polite, impenetrable smile greeted us and led us directly to a conference room, not an office. It was a space designed for serious discussions. A long, polished table of dark wood reflected the recessed lights. Windows looked out over the city. Mr. Eris Thorne stood as we entered. He was in his 60s, with silver hair cut close, wearing a tailored gray suit. His handshake was firm, brief, and impartial. "Richard, Mrs. Reynolds, please sit." We took chairs on one side of the table. Richard immediately leaned forward, claiming the space. I placed my portfolio on the table in front of me but did not open it. I kept my hands in my lap. "Eris, thank you for seeing us on short notice," Richard began, his voice taking on the hearty, confident tone he used for business. "We have a serious situation, a pattern of institutional errors, possibly fraud, affecting my assets. I need you to cut through it and secure everything." Thorne nodded, taking a seat at the head of the table, a legal pad before him. "Start from the beginning, please." Richard launched into his narrative. He described the loan denial, the bank officer's cryptic comments about titles and ownership, the subsequent investment statement showing my name alone. He used words like glitch, sabotage, and identity theft. He presented his thin file of old statements. As you can see, everything has always been in my name, jointly with Ellie, of course. But now these systems are showing alterations. I need you to issue corrective letters, contact these institutions, and reestablish the proper titles. I'm considering legal action for negligence. Or Thorne listened without interruption, making occasional notes. When Richard finished, Thorne turned his gaze to me. "Mrs. Reynolds, do you have any additional information?" I opened my portfolio. I removed a single sheet, the summary cover sheet, and slid it across the table to him. "This is a chronological summary of recent asset transfers and title changes pertaining to our marital estate. The supporting documents are here." I rested my hand on the closed folder. Thorne picked up the summary. His eyes scanned the page. His expression did not change, but his reading slowed. He read it a second time. He looked up at Richard, then at me. "I see." He reached for the folder. "May I?" "Of course." He opened the folder. Inside, the documents were neatly tabbed. Real property, financial accounts, vehicles. He examined the first document, the quitclaim deed for the house. He noted the notary stamp, the recording date with the county. He turned to the signature page. He studied Richard's familiar looping signature. He moved to the next tab, the investment account transfer forms. Again, Richard's signature, and the next, and the next. The room was silent except for the faint rustle of paper. Richard shifted in his chair. "What is all that, Ellie?" I did not answer. I watched Thorn. Thorn completed his review. He closed the folder. He placed his hands flat on its cover. He looked at Richard, his professional demeanor intact, but now charged with a new, heavy knowledge. "Richard," he said, his voice measured, "you need to see this." "See what?" Richard's voice held a note of impatient confusion. Thorn opened the folder again. He turned it around and pushed it slowly across the table until it sat directly in front of Richard. Richard leaned forward, his eyes dropping to the pages. For a moment, he was still. Then I saw his process begin. He saw the deed. He saw his signature. His brow furrowed. He flipped a page. He saw the investment form. His name. My name listed as sole owner. He flipped faster. His eyes darted from signature to signature, from title to title. His face, initially flushed with expectation, began to pale. The blood drained away, leaving a waxy, ashen tone. His lips moved slightly, forming silent words. "No, this is, but..." He looked up at Thorn, his eyes wide with a pleading, desperate confusion. "These are forgeries. They have to be." "They are not forgeries," Thorn stated calmly. "The signatures are consistent with your known signature. The notarizations are valid. The documents have been recorded with the appropriate agencies. These transfers are legal and binding." "But I never meant..." Richard's head swiveled toward me. His expression cycled through disbelief, dawning comprehension, and then a raw, volcanic anger. You did this? You tricked me into signing these?" I met his gaze. I did not blink. "You signed them, Richard. You asked me to handle the paperwork. I handled it. You stole from me." The words exploded from him, loud in the quiet room. He half rose from his chair. "Sit down, Richard." Thorn's voice was not loud, but it was a command, sharp as a blade. It was the voice of a man used to controlling rooms where emotions threatened procedure. Richard sank back, his chest heaving. "This is not theft," Thorn continued, his tone returning to neutral exposition. "This is a lawful transfer of assets, executed by the co-owner with the consent of the other, as evidenced by his signature on each document. The fact that Mr. Reynolds may not have fully understood the content of what he was signing does not invalidate the documents, given the established pattern of Mrs. Reynolds managing such affairs. He had a duty to read what he signed." Richard stared at the open folder as if it were a live animal that had bitten him. He looked from the papers to me, then back to the papers. The reality was physically entering him, and I watched it break him down. The bluster, the certainty, the very core of his identity as the man who made the rules, it crumbled under the weight of those pages. His shoulders slumped. He said nothing. He just stared. Thorn turned to me. "Mrs. Reynolds, what is it you wish to achieve with this meeting?" I had waited for this question. I had practiced the answer. I kept my voice even, clear, and devoid of triumph. It was simply a statement of new facts. To formally notify Mr. Reynolds of the current legal status of the assets and to discuss the terms of his departure from my home. Richard's head snapped up at my words. "Your home?" The phrase was a foreign object in his mouth. "Departure?" "Yes," I said. I opened a separate, thinner folder I had brought. It contained a single typed page. "These are my terms. They are fair. More than fair, given the circumstances." Thorn took the page from me. He read it quickly, his eyebrows lifting slightly. He passed it to Richard. Richard scanned the document, his hands trembling. This is a surrender." "It is a settlement," I corrected. "You will vacate the house, my house, within 30 days. You may take your personal effects, your clothing, and the sedan, which is still jointly titled. You will retain sole ownership of your individual checking account, which currently holds approximately $8,000. You will keep your retirement account from your former employer. That is yours. I make no claim to it." He stared at the paper. "The house, the investments, everything else are mine," I finished for him. "Legally, as of today, this agreement simply formalizes the practical outcome and sets a timeline for your transition. You're leaving me with nothing." The anger was returning, but it was weaker now, diluted by shock. "I am leaving you with exactly what you entered this marriage with," I said, my voice level. "A car and a bank account. You are leaving with more, in fact. Your retirement fund has grown substantially over 33 years. That growth happened while I managed the household and our joint finances. I consider that your share. You are not destitute. You are simply no longer in possession of assets that were never truly yours to command." He looked at Thorne, seeking an ally. "Eris, she can't do this. There must be something... marital property laws." Thorne steepled his fingers. "Richard, based on the documentation presented, the major assets are no longer marital property. They are her separate property. She transferred them out of the marital estate with your valid signature. You could contest the validity of the signatures, but a handwriting expert would likely confirm they are yours. You could argue undue influence or fraud, but given that you have delegated financial management to Mrs. Reynolds for decades, a court would likely find you negligent in your duty to inform yourself. Litigation would be long, expensive, and unlikely to succeed. Her offer," he gestured to the paper, "is a clean and reasonable resolution." The finality in Thorne's professional assessment was a door slamming shut. Richard deflated completely. The fight left him, replaced by a hollowed-out confusion. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not anger or contempt, but a genuine, bewildered question. "Why, Ellie? Why would you do this to me?" It was the only honest question he had asked in years. I considered my answer. I did not owe him emotional explanations, but I chose to give him one, delivered as fact. "You told me to just worry about the house," I said. "So I did. I worried about its deed, its title, its maintenance, its future. You told me you made the rules. So I learned the rules, the real rules, the ones written in county recorders' offices and on signature lines. You operated on assumption and bluster. I operated on documentation and patience. This is not something I did to you, Richard. This is something that happened because of you. Your inattention was a weapon you left lying around." I picked it up. He had no response. He looked back at the terms, his eyes unfocused. "Do you accept the terms?" Thorne asked him. Richard's shoulders slumped further. He gave a small, jerky nod. "I don't have a choice." "You always had choices," I said quietly. "You just never considered that I did too." Thorne took control of the mechanics. "I will have this formalized into a binding separation agreement. It will reference the pre-existing ownership status of the assets to avoid confusion. Richard, you will have your own counsel review it. I recommend you do so. Mrs. Reynolds, I will proceed at your direction." "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," I said. The meeting was over. We stood. Richard moved like a much older man. He did not look at me. He walked out of the conference room ahead of me, his posture defeated. In the elevator, the silence was total. He stared at the numbers descending. When the doors opened in the lobby, he walked out without a word, heading toward the parking garage. I did not follow him. I walked to the front of the building and hailed a taxi. Sitting in the back of the cab, watching the city pass by, I felt no euphoria. I felt a deep, resonant quiet. The tension that had coiled inside me for months, for years, was gone. The ledger was balanced. The gone column from my mother's books had been stopped, its drain sealed. The assets were secure. The rules were now mine. I had the driver take me to Beverly's house. I needed to be somewhere that felt like a victory, not just the absence of a war. When she opened the door, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug. "It's done," I said into her shoulder. She held me at arm's length, her eyes searching mine. And he's gone. In every way that matters, he's already gone. She smiled then, a real warm smile. "Come in. I'll make tea, and you will tell me everything." As I stepped into her familiar, welcoming house, I left the cold polish of the lawyer's office behind. The confrontation was over. The aftermath, the practical unwinding of a shared life, would begin tomorrow. But for this afternoon, there was only the quiet company of my friend and the solid, unshakable knowledge that I had reclaimed my mother's legacy and my own. Richard moved out on a rainy Saturday, 3 weeks after our meeting in Thorne's office. He came with 2 friends and a small rental truck. I stayed in the living room, reading a book. I heard the tread of footsteps upstairs, the scraping of furniture in what was once his study. There was no conversation between us. His friends avoided my eyes, carrying boxes and his favorite leather chair out to the truck. The process took less than 2 hours. When the truck pulled away, the rain-soaked street was empty. The house was silent, but the silence was now a different texture. It was spacious, not oppressive. The next morning, I called a locksmith. He arrived promptly and changed all the exterior locks. He handed me 3 new brass keys, cool and sharp-edged in my palm. I tested each one. The solid click of the deadbolt engaging was a definitive sound. I paid the man and put 1 key on my ring, placed 1 in the kitchen drawer for emergencies, and sealed the 3rd in an envelope with Beverly's name on it. I did not need to hide it. It was mine to give. That afternoon, I began to rearrange. I did not rush. I cleared out his closet, donating his abandoned clothes to the shelter downtown. I converted his study into a sewing room, a hobby I had let lapse decades ago. I aired out the spaces, cleaning not to his standards, but to mine. The house began to smell of lemon polish and the simple freedom of empty space. A week later, I invited Beverly and my niece Lisa for dinner. It was a Tuesday, an ordinary evening made significant by choice. I cooked. Not the elaborate meals I used to prepare for parties, but food that meant something. Smothered pork chops, collard greens with smoked turkey, cornbread, sweet potato pie. The kitchen was warm and fragrant. They arrived together. Lisa, her eyes bright with the relief of her first semester being fully funded, carried a bouquet of sunflowers. Beverly brought a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling cider. "For the housewarming," she said, her gaze sweeping the room with approval. We ate at the dining table, the same table where Richard had made his declaration. The memory was present, but it had no power here anymore. It was just a piece of furniture in a room filled with genuine laughter. "Tell me about your classes," I said to Lisa. She spoke eagerly about anatomy and physiology, about the clinical rotations she would start next year. "I wouldn't be here without you, Aunt Ellie, I mean that. You're here because you worked for it," I corrected gently. "I just removed an obstacle. That's what families should do." Beverly raised her glass of cider. "To removing obstacles, and to knowing which ones are worth the effort." We clinked glasses. The sound was light, musical. After dessert, we moved to the living room. Lisa excused herself to take a call about a study group. Beverly and I sat on the sofa, the remains of our pie on the coffee table. "How does it feel?" Beverly asked, her voice low. I looked around the room. The evening light slanted through the clean windows, catching the dust motes in a slow dance. The house was quiet, but it was a quiet I owned. "It feels like balance," I said. "The ledger is closed. My mother's gone column has stopped. My secure column is full." "And him?" I considered the question. "He is a man living with the consequences of his assumptions. I do not wish him harm. I feel nothing, mostly, and that is a luxury I have earned." Beverly nodded. "Good. Indifference is the real victory. Hatred means they still have a hold on you." Later, after they had both left with hugs and promises to visit again soon, I stood in the doorway, the new key in my hand. I locked the door behind them. I moved through the quiet house. turning off lights. In my bedroom, my room alone, I opened the window to let in the cool night air. I thought of my mother's trunk in the attic, her ledgers with their careful notations. She had documented the leaks in the boat. I had not just documented, I had repaired the hull and steered it to a new shore. The seed fund she left me was not the few $100s she had saved. It was the lesson. That attention to detail is a form of power, and patience is its engine. I got into bed. The sheets were cool and clean. The sounds of the house at night were familiar, but they were no longer the sounds of a shared life slowly suffocating. They were the sounds of a structure at rest, solid on its foundation. Tomorrow, I would call Lawrence Croft to review the final status of the accounts. I would work on a quilt in my new sewing room. I would meet Beverly for a walk in the park. The days ahead were not a dramatic new beginning, but a quiet continuation on my own terms. The rules were simple now. They were mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I looked forward to tomorrow with a calm, unwavering certainty. The house was quiet. The house was mine. I slept.